All right, I think we'll go ahead and slowly get started here. Welcome, everybody. It's so nice to see such a great big crowd for Lunch and Learn on a Wednesday. My name is Terry Parker. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm executive director at Rocky Mountain Wild. And I wanted to welcome everybody to this Lunch and Learn on lynx and habitat connectivity. Our presenters today are Paige Singer, who is a wildlife biologist at Rocky Mountain Wild, and Brendan Walsh, who is one of our board of directors at Rocky Mountain Wild. And before we get started, if I could just have everybody make sure to mute themselves. We have a crowd, and we'll have time for questions at the end, and also we'll have questions and answers in the chat, but if folks could mute themselves for the time being, that'll help facilitate and move us along a little bit. I also wanted to give a shout out to Wild Connections, one of our partnering organizations, for sponsoring us in this event today. It's always nice to have support from our friends and colleagues around the state. So thank you very much. And I just wanted to say, if you're not familiar with Rocky Mountain Wild, we are a nonprofit organization based in Denver, but we work all over Colorado and a little bit outside of the boundaries of Colorado in what's called the Southern Rockies ecosystem. Our mission is to protect, or did I say Southern Rockies ecosystem? Is that what I said? Okay. Our mission is to protect biodiversity, and we do that through making sure that we are protecting the most endangered and threatened species in Colorado, and that we're maintaining connected habitats, and that we are adding to the science base that helps us protect those species here in Colorado. And this is Endangered Species Week. It's a week that we celebrate every year as a way to bring awareness to the endangered and threatened species in our state. And every day of the week, we have a different activity. Today is this Lunch and Learn on Lynx. But if you would like to join us tomorrow, we're encouraging people to go to the Museum of Boulder and check out the monarch butterfly display that's there. Friday, we have a happy hour and trivia game on endangered species, and I'll drop a link for that in the chat box in a minute. And then also all week long, we've been hosting an online auction, and proceeds from the auction go specifically to our connectivity work. And there's actually a fund in need there, but so you can just donate. But if you are interested in some of the items, there's some great stuff up there, including some great jackets from Patagonia, hiking boots from Keen. There's some kids' toys. There's a pack raft. There's stays at various hotels and bed and breakfasts around the state. So it's a great online auction. Bidding is heating up. So if you want some items, I suggest getting in there now. And I'll drop a link to the auction in the chat as well. And I just wanted to tell everybody that today's session is being recorded. So if you have your camera on, your happy face is likely to show up in one of our recordings. If your camera is off, we won't see you. That means you can eat lunch during the Lunch and Learn. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Brendan Walsh, one of our board members, to set the stage for the Lunch and Learn today.
Great, thanks, Terry, and thanks everybody for attending. As Terry mentioned, I'm one of the board members here at Rocky Mountain Wild, and I think, like most of you, I'm very interested in this topic, as well as a lot of things we work on. But this has really emerged as an area for me that I'm very passionate about. So we're going to talk towards the end today. There's an open Q&A and talk about ways to get involved and how you can help us with this effort. And just kind of reviewing the agenda and what we're going to walk through here today. We're going to we've got our opening here, obviously. Then we're going to go ahead and jump into a video that Colorado Parks and Wildlife provided us. And then Paige is going to, Paige, one of our conservation biologists and GIS specialists at Rocky Mountain Wild, she's going to walk us through a recent feasibility study and talk a little bit about that around building crossings and corridors along the East Vail Pass area, and specifically focusing on lynx and kind of the elusive and rare lynx. And lynx, one of the very cool things that a lot of people may not realize is one of the few breeding populations outside of southwestern Colorado, where they were originally reintroduced in the early 90s, is along the Vail Pass corridor and in the national forest along there. And quite a bit of the research that you'll see in our video and that we'll talk through today has shown that the lynx in the area frequently are crossing I-70. And so we'll talk a lot about the drive for our interest at Rocky Mountain Wild around connectivity and building and maintaining these corridors for them, and then ways that you can get involved in the future, because a lot of this is just emerging within the state of Colorado and many other states as well that are starting to prioritize building wildlife crossings in their states. So we'll go through also a story map that Paige created that is pretty amazing, and make sure that we've shared the link. I think it's online as well, that we'd encourage you to share with your networks so they can do some self-education and learning and about the area and about the feasibility study. So with that, I think we'll go ahead and show you a video that was provided to us by Colorado Parks and Wildlife. They wanted to attend today, but had a conflict. But needless to say, they've created this really neat video on the movements of lynx throughout Colorado and our neighboring states. So that's what we're going to dive right into, and then the rest will be interactive session with Paige looking at her research.
So what's in those animations is what happens with lynx, especially lynx that are not reproductively active. So females that don't have kittens or males that didn't have a reproductively active female, is when it comes time for spring and summer and they don't have a den or kittens to tend to, a lot of times they take off and do what we term these walkabouts. So they take these big exploratory movements, and it seems like they're just sort of checking out the landscape. And so what you're seeing in these videos are exactly that. These are summertime movements of resident lynx who just didn't have anything to keep them at home during the summer, and they take off, head north, and start to explore. So some of them made it into Wyoming, some of them made it all the way into Montana or Idaho, and what's interesting is a lot of them spent the summer sort of wandering around and then sort of make their way right back to the same drainage, the same home range that they left from, come October, November, before winter hits. And so that's what you're seeing in these videos is various individuals and the big movements that they make, which is pretty impressive, because for a little cat, for a 20-pound cat, they're very capable of moving a long ways through some pretty incredible places and in places that we don't consider to be lynx habitat at all, really. Yeah, that's a little surprising, just because there is nothing east at all that resembles anything like lynx habitat. And so, it's a little surprising in that respect. But then again, I'm not sure that, they know exactly what's out there when they take off. But those animals were headed sort of out to nowhere, and, nothing good was going to come of that for them. The ones that actually went north, certainly there's patches of good habitat and even other lynx for them to run into up there. So that, makes more sense, I don't know, if the lynx know where they're headed or not. That's interesting to think about. But typical home range for lynx is about 75 square kilometers for a reproductively active female. They figure, a little more than 8 kilometers on a side if it's a square kind of thing. And then males are quite a bit bigger than that, maybe 100 to 120 square kilometers. Oftentimes a male will have at least a couple of females within his home range. Canada lynx is a cat. It looks very similar and is very closely related to bobcats, except they're very highly adapted to deep, soft snow winter conditions. So they have real long hind legs and then big feet that sort of act like snowshoes. Okay, so they do really well in deep, soft snow in places where lots of other species just flounder and can't really survive or make a living at all. And they're very tightly tied to snowshoe hares, and so much of their ecology, much of their existence is related to how snowshoe hares are doing and how many hares you have in a particular place. That's really about all that they eat, especially in the winter, is hares. And so they're famous for that. You see these famous lynx and hare cycles in basic ecology textbooks all the time. Anyone who comes through wildlife has seen those cycles and has heard about the relationship between lynx and hares, and it's no different in Colorado. That's what we found that they eat most of the time in most years, and that's sort of how they exist in their little niche in the world, is that really high elevation spruce fir forest where it snows a lot, deep soft snow. But in the springtime, in the summer, again, if they don't have dens to tend to and kittens to tend to, then that's when they can make some of these longer exploratory movements, and that's what we're seeing in these videos. We have several projects still going with lynx. Obviously, this agency spent a considerable amount of time and effort and money in the late 90s and mid 2000s to reintroduce lynx to the state. So we have several efforts that we've worked on, since then, all related to that. One big thing is we continue to monitor the population. So we've instituted a non-invasive monitoring plan to help us kind of keep tabs on how things are going and how lynx are doing in the state. We continue to do that. Shortly after we declared the reintroduction to be a success is when a lot of these bark beetle outbreaks really started to ramp up in lynx country. And so the question then became, this is a forest dwelling species, what is the impact to lynx and to their primary prey when huge chunks of that overstory is dying off. So we did a fair amount of research to look at that too. CPW sort of focused on the primary prey end of things, and then we collaborated with the Forest Service Rocky Mountain Research Station and looked directly at how lynx were responding to bark beetles as well. Another piece of research we did, again in collaboration with the Rocky Mountain Research Station, is assisted them in looking at impacts of winter recreation on lynx, because certainly, as we all know, winter recreation is a big thing in Colorado, and it's only getting bigger. And there certainly are places where people like to recreate, where lynx also like to hang out. And so the question there is, how do they do that? Can they partition the landscape, and how well does that work? And what's the impact of all this recreation on lynx? And then most recently, we're also looking at taking a closer look at how management of our national forest impacts snowshoe hare density. And then we know that in turn impacts, how lynx do as well. So we're taking a close look at if, as a manager, you decide to implement some management strategy on a piece of ground, what can you expect then hare density to be like immediately after you do that, a decade after you do that, 2, 3, 4 decades after you do that, even 6 decades out after you do that? What do you expect to happen through time? So as they're planning their projects and planning at kind of a landscape scale and making a mosaic out there of different treatments, what can we expect hare densities to look like in the coming decades? And then that gives us an idea of how valuable we expect those landscapes to be for lynx too. There's a lot of things I enjoy about lynx. It's such a cool species. I mean, for one, they're rare. I mean, even where they're common and they do well, they're rare. And so there's something intriguing about, a species that's out there, and it's out there, and you can see their tracks in the snow, but you really never see them. I mean, that's sort of an intriguing thing. Just the fact that they're so highly adapted to that environment is pretty amazing. Whenever you get a chance to cut tracks and to start following lynx, I'm always amazed at how well they can traverse that landscape in those snow conditions compared to us. You know, I can have the biggest snowshoes in the world, and I'm working hard and sweating hard, and I can tell by their gait that they're just cruising along and not really working hard at all. So it's amazing. It's amazing to me how well they can navigate that landscape. And it's, man, that's a tough place to make a living. I mean, it's deep snow. It is cold. I mean, man, it gets cold up there, and they just seem to do their thing, and they can live. We know we have lots of lynx in this state that, you know, we know their ages because we put them all out there, and or we found them as kittens, and you know, a lot of them are able to live just fine in Colorado in that kind of a harsh environment for 15 years or more, which is pretty amazing to me.
Great. Thanks for enjoying that video with us. Very insightful. And we have some others that if people are interested that we can share links to as well. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Paige, who's going to walk us through kind of the history of the East Vail Pass area and how we got involved there at Rocky Mountain Wild, her work there, as well as showing us her story map and the feasibility study. So Paige, over to you.
Great, thanks, Brendan. Thanks, Terry. As Brendan mentioned and Terry mentioned, my name is Paige Singer, and I'm a conservation biologist with Rocky Mountain Wild. I've been with the organization now for, I think, over 13 years. And I'm excited to share with you all the East Vail Pass, our story of East Vail Pass, and go into some details on a feasibility study that was recently finished. So here, I'm going to share my screen. Bear with me for 1 second. All right, does everybody see? Can everybody see a view of a highway with cars driving down it? Yes, okay.
Yes.
So Rocky Mountain Wild is a founding partner and fiscal sponsor of Summit County Safe Passages, which is a coalition that was born out of a stakeholder-driven effort spearheaded by the Forest Service back in 2016 and 2017 to assess all state and federal highways in Summit County and identified stretches of roadway that were most in need of mitigation for wildlife based on both the biological needs for wildlife and the needs, excuse me, for driver safety in the area. So through this assessment, 17 linkage areas were identified, and a variety of recommendations were made for each of these linkages. They ranged from, this linkage is actually pretty good for wildlife movement. You don't need to do anything now, but as the area gets developed and maybe you start talking about roadway expansion, make sure you consider wildlife in that. To like, there's a good structure here, but it could be retrofitted to be improved for better wildlife movement. To the final or the kind of the biggest recommendation is this area actually needs new wildlife crossing structures. So once the plan was completed, the coalition identified 3 priority areas to move forward on in the near term. And these areas were identified based on urgency and opportunity. So one of these areas, Pass, and I'm excited to share today with you today a story map that I created to highlight some of the exciting work the Summit County Safe Passages Coalition has been doing on East Vail Pass and how it's going to benefit wildlife and in particular Canada lynx in the area. So this is the story map that you're seeing about the I-70 East Vail Pass wildlife crossings, which is a priority initiative of Summit County Safe Passages. And I'm going to start out talking about why Vail Pass. Why is Vail Pass important? So it's nestled in the mountains between Copper Mountain and the top of Vail Pass. So we're talking about the east side of Vail Pass as you're going towards Vail, not the west side, which is going down the mountains into Vail. And this area has been long identified as an ecologically significant site, both within and beyond Colorado for a variety of wildlife. It's encompassed entirely by White River National Forest, including the Eagle's Nest Wilderness to the north. So it's one of the most intact and important habitats for many wildlife species in Colorado's mountain corridor. And this is actually a picture from the Eagle's Nest Wilderness area. And so this is our lunch and learn for Lynx for Lynx. So East Vail Pass is, as Brendan mentioned, is home to one of the few known breeding populations of Canada lynx outside of Southwest Colorado, where they were reintroduced in the late 90s. They are federally listed as a threatened species. And Vail Pass provides both important summer and winter habitat for the resident population of lynx, as well as their primary prey, snowshoe hare. But as you saw in the video, lynx are crossing I-70 a lot. So improving connectivity in this area is not only going to benefit the local population of Canada lynx, but it's also going to benefit animals that are making these dispersal movements, these long-range dispersal movements across Colorado. So Vail Pass also provides important summer habitat for another of Colorado's iconic species, Rocky Mountain elk, and reconnecting otherwise intact landscapes like Vail Pass is really important for species like elk so that they have access to the resources they need in the summertime, so that will help them survive throughout the year, and especially in the wintertime. So mule deer is also, Vail Pass is also important summer habitat for mule deer. And both mule deer and elk present a significant hazard to drivers on I-70. So providing safe passage for these species is also going to improve safety for the traveling public. And so I mentioned the Summit County Safe Passages Plan. And so this plan identified areas in need of the greatest need for wildlife to move safely across highways in Summit County. It was completed in 2017, and East Vail Pass was identified as a priority initiative. And you can click on this link here and it'll take you to the plan. So if you wanted to read more about, get into the details of the plan, you could do that there. So these are the current conditions on Vail Pass. I-70 on East Vail Pass is a divided highway. You've got the eastbound lanes and the westbound lanes separated by a wide natural open median. In the median, you've got West 10 Mile Creek and the Vail Pass Recreation Trail going down the middle of the median. I-70 in this area is an important travel corridor for our adventure community, residents, tourists, industries. And on average, this stretch of I-70 sees 23,000 vehicles a day. So this much traffic, animals are no longer even attempting to cross. It's just that much traffic creates a barrier for wildlife movement. And often those animals that do try to cross aren't able to do it successfully. So research from Wyoming shows that mule deer need a break in traffic of at least 60 seconds to be able to cross the roadway safely. And this is a 60-second video that I took last year, midday on a fall weekday. So not peak travel season for Vail Pass. And you can see that breaks in traffic long enough breaks in traffic for wildlife to move safely across the roadway are rare, even outside of peak travel periods. And one thing that this video doesn't show is the noise from this traffic. So we were just up there last week, I think, and just it's really obvious just the sound that all these cars on the roadway make, and that also has impacts to wildlife in the area. So the good news is that there are 5 existing span bridges. There are existing span bridges on I-70. There's 5 on the eastbound lanes. And then there's just 1 on the westbound lanes, and no direct connections between these existing structures. So this mule deer is using the 1 existing structure on the westbound lanes, but it has to know to go under the structure, hang a left, go about half a mile, hang another right to find the next existing structure. So this map here shows you, just kind of walks you through all the different structures, the existing structures and how they correlate to the proposed structures. Starting at the top of the pass, we've got Wilder Gulch. You can see it's a nice big span bridge that wildlife can easily go under. Moving down the pass, you've got Smith Gulch, another big span bridge, Stafford Gulch, Guller Creek. And then down towards Copper Mountain, you've got West 10 Mile Creek. All of these are nice big span bridges for wildlife to easily use. And then this is Corral Creek, which is the one existing span bridge at the top of the westbound lanes, about milepost 191.5. And then these are the proposed structures. So you can see how they're gonna tie in nicely with the existing structures. We've got an overpass and then 2 proposed underpasses, which I'm gonna go into a little bit more detail on here in a second. So as Brendan mentioned, back in late last year, Wood Engineering team completed the I-70 East Vail Pass Wildlife Crossings feasibility study. And this was accomplished with funding from Vail Resorts, A Basin, and the Center for Large Landscapes. And this study developed and evaluated preliminary engineering designs for the 3 recommended structures that are recommended in the Summit County Safe Passages Plan. You can click on this link if you want to read the feasibility study and get into its details. So the feasibility study considered wildlife needs and the feasibility of each crossing relative to the costs, traffic, environmental conditions, topography, and constructability at each of these crossing locations. You can see there's one at 193.5, then 193, and then 192.3 as you're moving up the pass. And then the yellow dots are where the existing crossing structures, the span bridges are. And this feasibility study, I should mention, gets this project to about 10% design. So it's a very preliminary assessment of these structures. So with any wildlife mitigation project, it needs to be accompanied by wildlife exclusion fencing to ensure the success of the project. And on East Vail Pass, because it's got that wide open median, it's going to be important that both sides of both the westbound and the eastbound lanes are fenced. And this will allow wildlife to have access, make sure that they get access to the habitat in the median. And it also helps them learn where the structures are by guiding them to the structures so that as they learn where they are, it just becomes a habit for them. So we're going to dive into some of the details of each of the structure. The first is the buried bridge at milepost 193.5. You can see it's down here by Copper Mountain. So the Summit County Safe Passages Plan does recommend a variety of structures, overpasses and underpasses for East Vail Pass. And the idea behind this is to ensure suitable crossing opportunities for the greatest variety of species, which we do have on Vail Pass. And 3 options were considered at the 2 underpass locations: a buried arch, a traditional bridge, and a buried bridge. And so at the lower location, the 193.5, a buried bridge is what the feasibility study moved forward with. And part of that reason is this location is important for is for elk. And it's across from an existing bridge under the eastbound lanes. So this is going to create a nearly direct connection across I-70. And by providing a larger underpass at the lower part of the pass and an overpass at the upper part of the pass, elk are going to be accommodated. Elk movement is going to be accommodated across the widest geographic area. So whenever you're building underpasses for wildlife, you want to make sure the openings are high enough to accommodate large animals like elk and moose. So the preliminary design of the buried bridge assumes a bridge with 15-foot clearance below it. You also want to make sure that the underpasses are wide enough that animals are going to be encouraged to enter. And so we're looking at an 85-foot width for this structure. And an important thing to know is that this 85 foot width also took into consideration if at some point in the future, the Department of Transportation decided to add a third lane. Currently, it's just 2 lanes of traffic on the westbound lanes on East Vail Pass. But if at some time in the future, the Department of Transportation decided that a third lane was necessary, this 85-foot width would still be able to accommodate that extra distance that wildlife would have to travel to get through the structure. And so currently the length that wildlife will have to travel is 45 feet to get through the structure. And a buried bridge is essentially a traditional bridge. The big difference is that it's going to have 4 feet of fill on top. And this provides insulation to avoid any icing concerns of a traditional bridge, which is a concern with bridges in an area such as Vail Pass, a high elevation area that has big winters. So here we're going to see the before and after. So this is what it looks like currently. This is what the roadway looks like currently, and then this is what it's going to look like once the structure is built. So the next structure is an arch underpass. I'm going to go over this one pretty quickly because it has a lot of the same considerations as the buried bridge. This one is the middle structure at 193. Again, diversity of structures were considered in the plan, and underpass is recommended at this location. And then the buried arch was the one of the 3 underpass options that was moved forward in the feasibility study for this location. And while this structure is smaller than the other underpass options, it was designed to have adequate vertical clearance and opening size to accommodate mule deer and lynx, and then possibly elk if once they habituate to the structure. Elk tend to take a little bit longer to get used to new things in their environment, but they may. We are seeing some evidence that elk may use a structure of this size. So 13.5 feet high, 44 feet wide, 45 feet long. That's the distance that wildlife will have to travel through the structure. And again, 4 feet of fill on top to avoid icing concerns. So here's the before and after. We've got this is what it looks like now, and this is what it's going to look like once the structure is built. So the final location is milepost 192.3, and the Summit County Safe Passages Plan does recommend an overpass for this location, again, to accommodate the widest variety of species. And the feasibility study looked at 2 overpass options, a traditional angled wall overpass and then an overpass. And the overpass is what the feasibility study moved forward. Again, because Vail Pass is important for elk, and although overpass are more expensive than underpasses, this is going to provide better visibility and openness for species like elk to provide a better connectivity for a wider variety of species across the greatest geographic area. This would be the first hourglass overpass constructed in the United States. So it offers unique aesthetic appeal, innovative engineering opportunities, and then the visibility of an overpass provides an excellent public education opportunity. I don't know if any of you have had the opportunity to drive up State Highway 9 just south of Kremling and seen Colorado's very first 2 overpasses. You're very aware when you're going through the overpasses, but you may not have also realized that you drove over 5 underpasses that are also there providing connectivity for wildlife. So the overpass width, when they decided how wide to make the structure, they considered how far wildlife were going to have to move across this to get across the structure. And although at 85 feet wide, it's a bit narrow, it's slightly narrower at the center point than a traditional overpass structure. This narrower width may bring down the cost of the structure, and it's also only narrow at for a very short period before it starts to widen out again. And the hourglass shape allows for a more gentle and even grade across the length of the structure. So it's going to provide better visibility for wildlife crossing over the structure. Again, we're looking at an 80-foot wide opening to the overpass for the cars to go through. And this again is to accommodate a third lane if it ever if the Department of Transportation ever decides that a third lane is necessary for East Vail Pass. We didn't want the overpass to preclude that third lane. So here we are for the before and after. This is what it currently looks like. And then this is what it will look like once the structure is built. So this section of the story map just kind of talks about various special considerations for each of the structure. The feasibility study did a very preliminary assessment of a lot of these, and as the project moves forward in design, a lot of these will be looked at more in depth. I'm not going to go into too much depth here, just talk really briefly about some of these things. So snow storage, they need to make, Vail Pass does have heavy snow in the winter, need to make sure that there's room for snow to be stored as the plows plow it off of the highway. There are wetlands in the area that need special consideration. Traffic detours, we want to make sure that impacts to traffic while these structures are being built are minimal, and that can be done through temporary detours. And the overpass, actually, a lot of the construction can happen off-site, and then there will just need to be night closures for any overhead safety critical work. Again, we talked already about the third lane accommodation. We wanted to make sure none of these structures precluded the option of a third lane sometime in the future. And the overpass had a couple of interesting considerations. One was shading. The feasibility study did a shading study to see if the overpass is going to shade the roadway that would and then cause any safety concerns for travelers on the roadway. So the dark blue are areas that are shaded throughout the day. For this preliminary study, it looks like they are mostly off of the roadway, of the traveled way, but this will need further study. And then also noise and light attenuation. As wildlife are moving across the overpass, we want to make sure that they have a barrier between them and the road below, both for noise and for light. So usually soil berms are added to the overpass, but that increases the footprint needed for the overpass. So what the feasibility study looked at was adding noise walls, which will serve the same function as the soil berms, but won't create a larger footprint. And then blowing snow is also a concern for Vail Pass. So the feasibility study looked at adding a permeable fence to the top of the noise wall to dissipate blowing snow, and then also reduce the likelihood of cornice formation, which could be a safety concern for the traveled roadway below if cornice forms and then fall on the roadway. So wildlife monitoring is an essential step of assessing how effective wildlife crossing structures are in restoring wildlife movement. For the past, since 2015, Rocky Mountain Wild and Denver Zoo have been engaging community scientists with wildlife monitoring on East Vail Pass. And nearly every species of wildlife found in Colorado's mountains has been documented using the habitat along East Vail Pass. So this map here, you can scroll over any of these icons and see some of the pictures of the wildlife that has been documented on East Vail Pass. And although these icons don't tell you exactly where this picture was taken, all of the pictures on the south of the highway were taken on the south of the highway, same for the north and for the median. In this next section, since that map just now, all you can really see are little thumbnails of the pictures. So this section lets you scroll through bigger pictures of all the wildlife. I think I've got a little bit of time, so I'm gonna go quickly through these. American marten, elk, raccoon, mule deer, moose, marten, elk. And here you can see the eastbound lanes and this nice big span bridge in the background. Canada lynx, another lynx. Another lynx. Red fox, porcupine, coyote, lynx, goshawk, black bear, porcupine, moose, moose and her calf, spotted skunk, marten, mountain lion, black bear, bobcat, snowshoe hare. You can see he's changing color. Hummingbird, marmot, the marmot, this one has elk and then a couple of deer checking the elk out. Black bear, another snowshoe hare with white feet. Here we've got a couple of mule deer on the side, and then you can see the westbound lanes of I-70 there in the background. Red fox, marten on the left side. Another deer and elk combo. Moose. And you can see I-70 in the background, cars on I-70 here in the background. Black bear. So now that the feasibility study is complete, the next steps are going to include environmental review processes, completing final engineering designs, and constructing the features. So the next phase is going to begin with project scoping. This will be to ensure that the proposed designs do not negatively impact the environment. And once this has been established, these designs can be refined and approved, at which point they'll be ready for bidding and construction. So I think that's considered shovel ready. Construction, once they're ready to go, the project can be advertised for bidding, and then construction will include monitoring to ensure environmental compliance with stakeholder and permit requirements. And it will also be scheduled to minimize traffic interruptions, as we already talked about. And while these wildlife crossings provide important ecological and economic benefits, all of these steps are going to require nearly 21 million to complete for the 3 structures and the fencing and design of the structures. And because this is a standalone project, there currently isn't a Department of Transportation infrastructure project that coincides with it. We think a lot of the support for getting the project through design is going to need to come through private funding. But once we can get the project fully designed and what they consider shovel ready, it's going to open the door to public, state, and federal sources. So here are just some ideas of things that you can do to help this project. Of course, as I already mentioned, you can donate now, or if you know people who might be interested in helping with fundraising or have connections to people, we're always interested in knowing about those folks. You can just help spread the word, talk to your friends about the impact I-70 has on wildlife and the importance of reconnecting wildlife habitat in the area. And I mentioned the community science project that is run by Denver Zoo and Rocky Mountain Wild, and we are continuing this project this summer. We had to take a little bit of a break last year with everything from COVID, but we're actually going to be expanding the project this summer. In the past, we've been looked at just the proposed overpass location, and for the next 4 years, we're going to be looking at the overpass and the underpass location. So we do need help in the field. And then we also have opportunity for people to help us with, we upload all of our data that we collect in the field to a platform called Zooniverse that allows the public to help us catalog the photos that we're getting on Vail Pass. So those are a couple of ways that you can help out specifically with the monitoring. And then we also are starting again to do some outreach, public outreach into the community. And we're always looking for volunteers to help out to man our booth. We have a couple of opportunities coming up this year. We've got Silverthorn First Fridays on June 4th. And then we've got the Boulder Film Festival on June 26th. And that is all I have. So I will stop my share.
Thanks, Paige. That was great. I put a link in the chat here for everybody to the story map that Paige created. So I highly encourage you to spend some time clicking through. There's a lot of details there. You can read the report as Paige mentioned, and walk your friends through or share it with people to get the word out. So we had a number of questions come into the chat. So why don't we start reading through some of those, and then if we get through all of them or some of them have been answered already, then we can by all means make this more interactive and come off mute and ask any other questions you may have. So Courtney had asked, just describe the ways that people can get involved, volunteer directly related to helping lynx. Or to working with the wildlife crossings, like checking cameras. We talked a little bit about there at the end, sorting through images on Zooniverse. That's pretty fun to do. I've done that myself. But what about directly related to helping lynx, Paige?
That is a good question. We do need volunteers in the field. So that's one way to help directly to help lynx directly, but through the efforts that are going on Vail Pass. I don't know of any volunteer opportunities right now for that would specifically benefit lynx. I know that Parks and Wildlife is still monitoring them, but I'm pretty sure that's a internal agency project. I don't believe that they are taking on any volunteers for that. So probably the easiest way would just to help us out in the field, either in the field or by helping us go through our images once we get them up after the field season.
Great. Sally had asked whether lynx were reintroduced in the Vail Pass area as well as Southwest Colorado, or did the two and do the two populations move back and forth?
So they were not reintroduced in the Vail Pass area. They were only reintroduced in the San Juans in the southwest of Colorado. There are two kind of core populations, one in the South San Juans and then one in the collegiates. And then the lynx obviously are kind of slowly moving their way north. So we do have a small resident population in Vail Pass. As far as I know, it's hard to know if they're moving back and forth. They aren't collaring the animals anymore. They did do a small a study on recreation in the area that they had some collared animals, but there currently aren't any collared animals. They're moving to non-invasive monitoring. They're doing some cool work with environmental DNA. So they'll go and they'll track a lynx and then they'll be able to scoop up the snow and get DNA from skin cells that are left in the snow. Some pretty cool stuff is happening, but so I don't know if the populations are moving back and forth, but I do know that they weren't reintroduced to the Vail area. So population is doing well and expanding throughout Colorado.
Okay. Do some species prefer overpass versus underpass? And if so, what do the lynx prefer, if we know?
Yeah, so some species do prefer overpasses to underpasses. I think it has more to do with the visibility. Like it tends to be hard to build a underpass large enough for certain species like elk. So then the overpass is an option, might be a better option for them. Lynx, I think it's more critical that they have cover. So coming up to the roadway so that they have forest cover that goes right up to the roadway so that they can feel secure and then they cross. There has been research that has shown that where they are crossing the highway is dependent on how close the forest is coming up to the roadway. So that's going to be an important consideration for the overpass and the underpasses, is that they have adequate cover for lynx, but also for other species that need cover to feel secure. So it's interesting because we have we have elk who like nice, wide open, good visibility, and then you have other species that want to feel secure and as secure so that they will use a structure. So there's a lot of things to consider, and it all depends on the species that you have in the area, which is one of the reasons why Rocky Mountain Wild and Denver Zoo have been doing the monitoring up there, is to make sure that we're taking into consideration all the species that we need to make sure we can improve connectivity in the area.
Great. And this may have been answered, but Jennifer asked if there's a concern that the underpasses could get clogged with snow, and was that part of the feasibility study?
Yeah, so if you look at the feasibility study, they do talk about that, and they did consider putting kind of, I don't know, like snow shields over the overpass, but they decided that the additional distance that would require wildlife to have to move to get under the roadway was detrimental to wildlife movement. So they decided that a lot of species aren't going to be in the area in the wintertime, and then the species like lynx that are in the area still are still going to be able to use the structure. That is still going to be, as the study moves forward, or as the project moves forward through design, that is going to be a consideration to figure out what are some ways that we can mitigate snow, both from, Vail Pass gets a lot of snow, but you also have snow plows that are moving snow off the roadway. So that is definitely a big consideration for the area. And I should mention that Vail Pass, I believe this is one of the highest locations for wildlife crossing structures. And there is a project going on the west side of Vail Pass currently that is being constructed, or is in the process of, it's moving forward with construction here pretty soon. And I think we're going to have a lot of lessons learned from that project, both from snow and the impacts it has to the crossing structures, but also from the fencing, because wildlife fencing has not been built at this elevation before. So I believe they're actually going to do a little bit of a design study on the west side of Vail Pass to kind of see what types of wildlife fencing will work best at this elevation.
Okay. And then just a couple more. Was cost a factor in the decision to go with the smaller arch at mile 193? And has an hourglass overpass been constructed elsewhere outside of the US?
Okay, so the cost for the smaller arch, it's not, the cost difference between the buried bridge and the arch underpass is not significant. So cost wasn't really a factor. It was more because it was a feasibility study, very preliminary. We wanted to look at a variety of crossing structures and make sure that they would be feasible to build on Vail Pass. So the idea is that there is the potential that maybe we'll decide as we move through design that an arch underpass makes sense at that middle structure, like 2 arch underpasses or 2 buried bridges. So the idea was more to evaluate a variety of structures so we know that they will work on Vail Pass, and have that as we're moving the project through design. And then as far as the hourglass overpass has been constructed elsewhere, that is a very good question. And I don't know the answer. I should know the answer to that, but I don't. So I will look that up, and I will get back to you, Renee. That's a good question. Actually, Renee, do you know? You might know.
I don't know. I was so
Okay.
curious though.
Yeah.
So, and fantastic presentation. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thanks, Renee.
Great. And then I think Renee had one other question actually on here. What other steps must be completed for this to be considered shovel ready?
So we need to get the project through, through 30% design, and then I think it's 90% design. We'll include environmental analyses, and then just kind of doing these are just preliminary designs, so kind of finalizing the designs and making sure those final designs will still work in the landscape. And I see John Cronholm on here. I could put him on the spot, but I won't do that to you, John. He's an engineer from CDOT, so he probably knows.
All right. Well, thanks everybody. Really appreciate the time. I think we're up on the time box here. I know there was one last ask if we could repeat the information about the events that were mentioned at the start. Maybe Terry, do you want to do that and close us out?
Absolutely. So again, this Friday, we're having a happy hour with our staff, virtual happy hour with our staff, 4 to 5, and some trivia questions about endangered species. You can find the links to these on our website, rockymountainwild.org, or they were earlier in the chat. And then we also have an online auction going on right now, where all of the proceeds are going towards our work for connectivity and East Vail Pass. And again, the chat that was in the chat earlier. And I do want to point out, in that online auction, you can bid to win a small airplane ride over East Vail Pass with a biologist from the Forest Service. So if you really want to get in the air and see what these things are going to look like from the air, that's a great opportunity. So thank you everybody again. Brendan, Paige, any last final thoughts?
Oh, thank you for joining us today.
This session was recorded and we'll have it up on our website later this week. Thank you everybody for joining. Nice to see so many friendly faces, familiar names.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.